Hello everyone, I am Grandmaster Renato Quintiliano, and let's see the theoretical coverage of round 5 in the Candidates tournament. As usual, many interesting games, so let's see what what happened today. We had two Petroffs in this round, the first of them between Firouzja, Firouzja and Duda, and so it was e4, e5, knight f3. I think Duda's choice of playing the Petroff today kind of surprised Elireza because 2 rounds ago against Caruana, Duda chose c5 and he played the Sicilian Najdorf with a very sharp game on the not a very sharp game actually, and they were quickly to an end game, but it was the English attack with h5 that game that which was a draw. So perhaps e5 today uh, might have surprised the Firouzja a little bit. So knight f3 and now Duda played the Petroff, which is very solid, very reasonable to his style. So then knight takes e5 was played, a move that is not so popular in Firouzja's games. Recently, he has played with d4 with some successes, like in the last FIDE Grand Swiss, the tournament that qualified him to play the candidates. He won that tournament and won a couple of nice games with d4. But today he chose knight takes e5, then d6, knight f3, knight takes e5, d4. Checking Firouzja's games, he has not played d4 recently. I mean, he has tried a lot of moves here, but not d4. On the other hand, after d5, bishop d3, bishop f5, Duda has no less than 16 games with this move in the database. So the Petroff is a very common opening in Duda's games. He plays it a lot, and in this position should have come hardly should have come as a surprise for Firouzja. So castles, bishop e7, rook e1, castles. This this is a more flexible move for black. Okay. Here bishop f5 is not the most played move. I should mention that. Knight c6 is the most played, and bishop d6 was played by Duda twice. But bishop f5 is a move that he likes very much because he has a lot of games with it. So castles, bishop e7, rook e1, and castles. As we will see, this keeps black's structure more flexible because after knight c6, the same idea seen in the game would work much better for white. So after castles, Firouzja played knight bd2. This is not the most played, but it's a very practical idea, very practical line, very also totally playable and interesting. c4 is the most played, is the most popular move here, but the idea of knight bd2 is that well, it's better to explain that after knight c6, because after knight c6, white plays knight bd2 like in the game, but in this position, after knight takes, queen takes d2, bishop d3, queen d3, castles, white will get a pleasant position here because of the control over the e file. So c3, for example, queen d7, bishop f4. This had been played before by Firouzja against Lenderman in like 3 years ago. Rook f e8, rook e2, bishop d6, bishop takes, rook takes, queen takes, rook e1. Despite the position is simplified, white enjoys more space, and also he controls the only open file, and also this knight is a bit misplaced on c6, and it will have to be improved by some way in the next moves. So meanwhile, white's position is very healthy and very comfortable. And in fact, Firouzja won very nicely this game after knight c6. But after castles, knight bd2, the first point is that now knight takes d2 doesn't work. Black can't go for this exchange because of bishop takes f5. Knight takes f3, queen takes f3, and now the d4 pawn is not hanging like it would be after knight c6 instead of castle. So white has the same advantages like before, but also the bishop pair and a lot of advantage, a big advantage in development. So this is strategically very difficult for black already. But here Duda played knight d6 instead of knight takes d2. And he had played this position also a few times. Firouzja continued with knight f1, but knight b3 had been played by Nepo against Duda, and bishop takes f5 was played by Anand against him. And knight f1 was Firouzja's move, so now c6. Bishop takes d3 was played by Duda in 3 games, but this time he chose c6. And knight g3. Bishop takes f5 was played by Carlsen against Duda recently in a rapid online game, but knight takes, queen d3, and it was a draw. This game was a draw later. And Esipenko played against Duda bishop f4 in that last year Tata Steel. But okay, knight g3, bishop takes, queen takes. And now black continued with knight a6, which is an interesting route for the knight, because he aims to have the knight on c7. We will see this is connected to a very interesting plan for black, a very good plan. Knight d7 is also possible and might seems at first sight more natural, but after bishop f4, rook e8, h4, that happened in one game, white had some pressure, white had some initiative. It was a online blitz game, but okay, this is a typical idea for white to grab some space on the king side and also to prepare ideas like knight g5. But knight a6, then bishop d2, developing the bishop. It makes sense because now on f4 the bishop would be exposed to attacks by this knight, knight c7, knight e6. This is an important point and useful point for black. The knight is coming to close the e-file. This is very important because white expects to get some pressure on the e-file. So bishop d3, knight c7. Now b3 was played by Firouzja. It's also a normal idea here to play c4 and try to pose some pressure, to put some pressure on black's sentry, because the structure is very symmetric and black has a solid position. So if he is able to arrange the pieces, like to play rook e8 and bishop f8 or bishop f6, exchange one pair of rooks, queen d7, rook e8, then black will be totally fine. So white should try to do something before he completes the total mobilization and starts the exchanges. So b3, rook e8, then c4, bishop f6, and here we had the same new move in the game, which was rook a1, but it was not exactly a challenging move for black, as we will see. Bishop a5 was played in Duda's previous game in this position. It was played by Idani from Iran, but now he went for a very good plan, very good idea. b6, bishop c3, and he releases the tension in the center first. D takes c4, b takes c4, but now he plays b5, provoking an unbalanced structure, because the game went rook takes e8, knight d takes e8, c takes b5, knight takes b5. White has an isolated pawn on d4, black has an isolated pawn on c6, so this is already equal. the pawns, the weaknesses compensate each other, so the position is equal. But Duda eventually outplayed his opponent and won a nice game that was in the last FIDE World Cup, a tournament that was won by Duda. So this was one of the nice games he won in that tournament. But after Rook A1 by Firouzja, that doesn't pose obstacles to Black's plan. So Duda played Rook takes E1 first, Rook takes, and now he goes for the same idea: D takes C4, B takes, and B5. And this basically solves Black's problems. So if C4, C5, Knight C4, Black gets very solid outposts for the pieces on E6 and D5, very nice squares for the knights and also for the queen. And after C takes B5, C takes B5 was played. Knight takes Knight D takes B5 would allow Knight E4, which could be a bit unpleasant since Bishop takes D4 looks bad in view of A4 and Black has many pieces hanging. Bishop takes F2 doesn't work because of Knight takes F2, defending the queen. And Knight C takes B5, Knight H5 also gives some pressure for white. But C takes B5 is good enough, creating a nice square for the knight on C4. And here, Knight H5 could be tried. Was an idea, but Firouzja played the Bishop A5 and now Knight C4. So he had to exchange on C7, Knight A4, Queen D8. Looks like White has a promising passed pawn in the center, but actually it's very easy for Black to keep it blocked. So Black's not facing real problems here. So he played A4, A6, A takes, and Knight C3, Queen D7. So position is equal, and soon a lot of exchanges took place, and they soon agreed to a draw. Going back, looks like the only serious attempt for White in this position is to play C5. Because this is White's only chance of posing some problems for Black. So I tried to make some analysis here. It's important to see that the knight has no good squares. So, for example, if your rook takes e1, rook takes and knight d8, Black's position soon will be very unpleasant. Knight f5, knight e6, then h4, knight 8, c7, and b4, and White simply winning space on both sides, and Black's position is already cramped and will become more unpleasant with each move. So this is already very difficult, and in practice it's already very difficult, but objectively the engine already says that White is winning. The knight has also a very strong square on d6 on the top. So here actually Black has to sacrifice a pawn. So this is why c5 looks like the critical test. Knight e4, knight takes, d takes, rook takes, queen takes, knight e6. And here the right way of defending the pawn, tactically defending the pawn, is with rook d1. Because of course bishop c3 or bishop e3 are met by knight takes c5. So rook d1. And here I left my engine analyzing this position by some time, and after reaching a considerable depth, it says that this position is equal. But I think it can be the next discussion in this line, because the right move here is queen d7, which is not so obvious. But the point is that after knight takes d4, White plays bishop c3, and knight takes f3, queen takes, queen e7 is worse for Black because of rook e1. Queen d8, bishop takes, queen takes, and rook e7 is a very unpleasant endgame for Black. It will be a difficult defense, sure. And after queen e7, which is the only move, queen takes, knight takes, f3, intermediate, g takes, bishop e7, rook d7, bishop c5, rook takes b7. White keeps some pressure, and will probably win a pawn in the next moves, the c6 pawn, and although black can draw with correct play, it will be very unpleasant as well. So that's why queen d7 is the right move. And after queen f5, because bishop e3 is still met by knight takes c5, another pin. But queen f5, rook d8, bishop e3, bishop e7, threatening again knight takes c5, this time because there is a discovery the attack. Then knight e5, queen e8, and white can finally organize the pieces with queen b1, avoiding any pins. But after rook d5, b4, bishop f6, knight f3, queen d7, queen e4, g6. Okay, we have gone too far. But my engine says this balanced position, it's equal because it's very difficult to make progress for white. I assume this, but okay, maybe it's equal. Maybe Duda was prepared until this point, or maybe we will see in next games, future games in this position, if white has some way of try to exploit the pawn up here, the advantage. But by now I think yeah, it looks probably equal. But okay, the way Firouzja played turned out to be harmless for black, because basically Duda did the same plan he did in a previous game, and equalized without problems. So this seems to me that strangely Firouzja came without an idea against the Petroff, but there is the chance he was simply surprised by e5, and he was expecting more the Najdorf. Now let's move to the second Petroff of the day, between Nakamura and the Nepomniachtchi. This was a more interesting game. e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight e5, d6, knight f3, knight e4, d4, d5, bishop d3. Now Nepo goes for the most classic move order with knight c6. It's worth mentioning that Nepomniachtchi has played sometimes the Petroff recently, and he had already played in the last candidates, the tournament he won, and he won a very important game against Wang Hao in the final rounds of the tournament, which was a very important game, and he played a very solid as black, so he chose also to this game against Nakamura. So castles, bishop e7, and Nakamura plays c4 here, which is a very nice line, a line that I always found interesting, but by some reason went out of fashion. Now rook e1 doesn't transpose to Firouzja game. The attempt of, I don't know, couch black in the move order, like if bishop f5, knight bd2, and knight takes, queen takes, bishop d3, queen d3, castle c3, and we are in the game Firouzja Lenderman by transposition. But after rook e1, black has also the option of bishop g4, and white can choose between c3, f5 with a complex fight, of course, or also c4. But all of this is very heavily studied. Like for instance, after c4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop f3, queen f3, knight d4, queen d1. This pawn sacrifice was played in a lot of games, and black is already able to solve the problems very satisfactorily with d takes c4, bishop takes and c5, queen a4, queen d7, queen takes, king takes, bishop e3, bishop takes f7, knight c2, looks okay for black, rook d1, king c6, and rook a d8. So bishop e3, rook e8, d8, bishop takes, c takes, bishop b5 check, king d6, rook a d1, king c5, very nice move, but it only leads to a repetition after rook e5, king d6, rook e1, king c5. This was played, by the way, between Ivanchuk against Wang Yue. So as you have seen, as you can see, this is everything is already studied by white and black players. So knight bd2 can be played here as well, but now again, black you won't transpose with bishop f5, rook e1 to an unpleasant position for black. Black will play knight takes d2, bishop takes, and bishop g4, c3 and castles. And it's similar but not the same, so there are some differences here. But Nakamura played c4, knight b4, bishop e2, castles, knight c3, bishop f5, and now white plays a3, knight takes c3, b takes c3, knight c6, and rook e1. All of this is very theoretical, is non-theory. And as I said, I always considered this position very interesting to play as white, but by some reason in the last years it is out of fashion. I don't know exactly why, but I hope that after this game, white players will give attention again to this line, because I always thought there was some potential here, at least to get a game against the Petroff with nice chances. So Nepo played rook e8, and now Nakamura played rook a2. Not the most played move in this position, but it was a move he had played before in one game, but probably probably surprised a little Nepomniachtchi, because here he spent quite some time already. He spent like 16 minutes. Bishop f4 or c takes d5 are more popular here, are more common. But rook a2 has a very interesting idea. It's a very flexible, very useful move. So bishop f8, Nepo played this after thinking for some time, but d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and knight a5 is an interesting game that shows, which was played in a tournament I was some years ago, and shows some of the points of having this rook on a2, because that game went bishop takes f7, very interesting sacrifice, king takes, rook e2, and now the rook is already on the e file very quickly, with a lot of pressure, of course, on black's position, threatening, for example, among others, bishop f5, bishop g5. So black defended badly with bishop d7, bishop g6 was the right move, and here white could have reached a crushing attack already, a winning attack with queen c2, because if king g8, then the queen goes to a2, king h8, knight e5, rook f8, and knight takes d7, and the white is already winning. And after something like bishop f6, rook takes e8, bishop takes, queen h7, and white has 2 pawns for the piece, and ideas like queen f5 and knight g5, or bishop g5 sometimes. So it's the attack comes very easily, and it's very strong as well. Here, knight a5 is the most played, and it was how the previous game by Nakamura in this position went. So he played the c takes d5, queen takes, and here rook b2. So this is the main point of Nakamura's rook move here, because the rook can be activated via a2 to the e file or to the b file, because that was not possible with the bishop on f5 control taking away the b1 square. So he plays rook a2 and the rook b2, and he's already threatening rook b5 here, but it's a very useful way to bring this rook to the game. So that game went c6, and now he played knight e5, bishop takes a3, bishop f3, queen d6, rook e2, bishop c1, queen c1. White has sacrificed a pawn, but in return he obtained the nice coordination for the pieces and some pressure in the center. this knight is a bit misplaced on a5, so there are lots of ideas, right? Lots of good points on white's position to compensate for the pawn. That was a game between Nakamura and the Jacobian in USA Championship like 6 years ago, and Nakamura eventually won this game. Right now, white's already threatening knight c4, winning on the spot, but that game went to rook f8, and well, Nakamura played, if I'm not wrong, here queen f4, I guess. No, bishop e6 was played, of course, and then bishop e4, and he kept increasing the pressure with moves like queen b1, f4, f5, and soon he got some initiative and won. The game was a bit complicated. It was a complicated fight, but he eventually won. But probably this was a bit, I don't know, new for Nepo, because nobody had played as Nepomniachtchi has only a few games on the Petroff. Nobody had played against him this line before, this variation with c4 and this stuff with rook e1 here. So he was a bit surprised and played the bishop f8 here. But this move, there's nothing bad with it, about it. It's a normal move, okay, very natural. Then c takes d5 was the new first move. A previous game by Alexeyenko went a4, probably preparing to play rook b2 without being worried about the a3 pawn. But Nakamura played c takes d5, queen takes, and here he played c4 right now. Rook b2, b6, a4 was another option, could have been considered, but c4 is also okay. And here Nepo did a very strange move, very risky move, because more or less any retreat by the black queen is playable here. Like queen d8 is possible, queen d7 is possible, or queen d6. Queen d6 looks the more natural, avoiding bishop f4 and keeping an eye on both flanks and on d4. So after rook d2, for example, I don't know if Nakamura would continue like this, but makes sense. Bishop e4, then bishop b2 and the rook a8, and looks like black has at least a health position here, a solid position, and can all the pieces develop it. So looks like black has a playable position at least. On the other hand, after queen e4, he puts the queen in danger, obviously, on the e file. It's I don't know exactly what he considered here, because white's next moves look pretty natural. You know, Nakamura played bishop f1, and now this is not. I mean, queen e4 is not a losing mistake. It's not like a blunder, but after bishop f1, it's already very delicate for black, because he had to play queen b1, which doesn't look supernatural to me. It looks a bit strange move. And after rook takes e8, rook takes e8, rook b2, the queen goes to a1, rook takes b7, and here black is just holding by making a lot of precise moves. So starting with bishop e4, rook takes c7, and now if he plays bishop takes a3, for example, here black is lost after d5. Queen takes c1, queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes c6. There are two passed pawns in the center, so white is technically winning. And here he would have to find bishop d6, rook d7, and now the point is that black can play bishop takes a3, because if d5, there is bishop takes f3, queen takes, and knight e5. This only works because the rook is on d7 and not on c7. So queen takes, bishop takes, knight takes d7, and black is at least fine in this endgame. Black shouldn't be worse. So the only way to fight for an advantage for white is knight d2, threatening knight b3, for example. But queen c1, queen takes, bishop takes, knight e4, rook e4, d5, rook e7. Otherwise, white is giving mate on the 8th rank, but rook e7, dc6, rook takes d7, c takes d7, bishop g5, and black should hold the ending, I guess. So this was pretty concrete, very concrete, so very difficult to find over the board. On the other hand, he played after bishop f1, queen g4. Now black should have lost. So this was much worse, because after h3, basically black's position is very badly coordinated, and it's too easy for white to keep increasing the pressure. Rook takes e1, queen takes, queen e4, but now the rook comes to e2, and now queen b1 is not possible anymore because of g4. This is a very strong idea. So bishop d7, for example, d5, knight d8, queen c3, and the white keeps improving the pieces, activating all the pieces, while black is totally tied to passive positions to his pieces, and the black's position is also cramped. So queen b6, knight e5, and black's position is very difficult, and the white's position keeps increasing here. So technically it's very difficult, and practically it's probably going to be a defeat for black soon. So it's too much pressure. So he played queen d3, but here by some reason Nakamura also couldn't find the correct path. It's not that simple, because white's position looks very pleasant, and it is very pleasant, but not so easy to find a final blow, like a winning variation. So he played rook b2, a repetition, but knight h4 was already very strong here. In fact, knight h4 was the winning move. It would lead to material gains for white. For example, there are too many moves here for black, but none of them enough to save the game. Like bishop g6, then d5, knight d4, rook d2, queen c3, then knight takes g6, h takes, and bishop b2, and white wins a piece. This time, bishop d7, d5, knight d8 is met by rook e7, very strong move, because you attack the queen and the bishop and wins a piece again. Queen d4 is the only move, but knight f3, and white wins. And the same queen b1 doesn't work now, because after d5, knight d4, rook b2, black can try in many ways, but the position in the end is always disparate. Like queen a1, knight takes f5, knight takes, rook takes b7, bishop a3, bishop d2. Black manages to escape to an endgame, but the endgame is hopeless. Like bishop d6 to defend c7, but then bishop d3, knight d4, bishop c3. The knight has no stability, and after c5, bishop takes, c takes, rook d7, rook b4, bishop b4, rook c7. Looks like white's pawns are too fast and too strong here advancing, so the endgame is also lost. And queen e4 is even easier, because of queen takes e5, bishop takes e4, rook takes b7, and it's a free pawn in the endgame. But some of these positions are not so clear over the board. Like you have to see, you keep the pressure on the endgame, and I suppose Nakamura was still looking for something that would win big material, serious material. So he played rook b2, queen e4, rook e2. It was still possible to find knight h4 here, but he played rook e3, queen b1, d5, knight e7, and now step by step looks like white's advantage started to be reduced. Like after, like here, knight d4 was still strong, but after knight d2, queen a1, knight b3, queen f6, bishop d2 threatening bishop c3, knight g6. Now the worst, black has survived the worst, so it's possible to keep some control in black's position now, because before it looked very, very difficult with the the queen on d3 in risk, but now the queen is safer, so black has better chances. And in fact, in the next few moves, white's advantage was gone and the game ended in a repetition. But this was a more exciting Petroff than Firouzja Duda, and Nakamura could have won a very nice game, because the idea for his idea for Rook A2 was very interesting, very creative, and it put some difficult problems for Nepomniachtchi, but eventually he didn't find the strongest continuation, and the Nepo was managed to defend little by little and neutralized the pressure. But also very interesting game. Next, let's see this game between Radjabov and the Liren. It started with a move order of Catalan with g3 on move 3, bishop b4, and Radjabov played knight d2, which is also, I mean, bishop d2 is the more popular for Catalan players, but knight d2 is also very playable. I play myself knight d2 against eventual checks on b4. It's less forcing as well, not so bishop d2. There are some forcing lines, but knight d2 is okay. But both moves, of course, very interesting, very playable. So castles, bishop g2, and the d5, knight gf3. Liren chose b6, very solid as well, because d takes c4 is can lead to sharp complications, to sharp positions, but b6 is very solid. Castles, bishop b7, and here we are more in a Queen's Indian defense position. Radjabov played b3. I prefer knight e5 with ideas like knight df3 to improve the knight, or queen a4. And c takes d5 first, followed by knight e5 is also very popular here to define the structure. But b3 is also very popular. Knight bd2, bd7 was played by Ding, bishop b2, and rook c8. Rook e8 in this move, or in the previous move, like played by Alexeyenko against Giri in the last candidates, is more popular, but Ding decided to develop the rook to c8, and after rook c1 play queen e7 to keep the chance of developing this rook to d8 and not to e8. So here Radjabov played e3. There are two interesting moves for white. One of them is knight e5 first, and the other is a3 directly. But also knight e5 rook d8 is connected with a3, because this idea is very interesting to try to pose some problems for black. Because if the bishop retreats, like bishop d6, then knight e5, rook f d8, we can play c takes d5, e takes d5, and there is this nice idea, knight e c4, capturing the d6 bishop, and although black's position remains very solid, the bishop pair can be dangerous in these positions in long term. So this is a very nice idea. But the critical line is bishop takes a3, bishop takes, queen takes, rook a1. We regain the pawn on a7. And here black can play rook b8, which is solid but a bit passive, and will give white time to mobilize the pieces. Or try a clever research with your rook a8. Because if your rook takes a8, rook takes, queen c2, c5, position is totally equal, is balanced. The pawns in the center will be exchanged soon, so it looks very equal to me. Or white can play rook takes b7, queen c2, queen c6, and here there are some interesting complications, starting with e4. Because now, if queen takes b7, then white has e5, knight e8, c takes d5, e takes d5, and here, despite having an exchange down, white can get very nice compensation with the following idea. Knight g5, h6, knight h3, c6, knight f4, knight c7, knight f3, knight e6, knight h4, and white's looking for ideas on the king side, like knight f5, knight h5, queen g4, with a actually very interesting compensation here. So this was a possibility, and of course it was possible to start with knight e5, rook f d8, and a3. But now bishop takes a3, bishop takes, queen takes, rook a1. The queen goes to a safe square, f8, rook takes a7, and the bishop a8. This looks solid enough for black, so this would be equal. And also, black could play bishop takes d2 here, queen takes and c5. And again, we have an interesting strategic fight here because white has the bishop pair, but black is also well developed and keeps tension in the century, so not so easy for white to open the position in a favorable way. Anyway, Radjabov played e3, which is a more solid approach, only just preparing to develop the queen on e2, making a space for this queen. So c5 was a new move, probably an over the board idea, because Ding fought here for 15 minutes. Rook f8 was seen to had been seen in 2 games, but c5 is fine. And here, this was the critical moment for Radjabov to fight for an advantage, I guess, because he had to play a3. This was the most critical move. Then it would be black's turn to choose between bishop a5, which is more tense, or bishop takes d2. But bishop takes d2 looks easier, like bishop a5 after c takes d5, e takes. It's difficult for black to make some changing in the structure because of this bishop. So he would have to find knight b8, a very unusual and but strong maneuver here to prepare bishop a6 and create some problems for white as well. But bishop takes d2 looks easier, because after queen takes d2, it's possible to play c takes d4. And if knight takes, knight e4, queen e2, d takes c4, d takes, rook takes, rook c8, queen e2, knight df6, and this looks equal. Black eventually exchanges the light square the bishops, probably. And in case of e takes d4, rook c7 is an useful move, relieving a potential pin on the diagonal and preparing to double rooks on the c file. So this looks okay for black. And if knight takes d2, c takes d4 again. Bishop takes d4, e5, bishop b2, knight c5 gives a free game for black. And e takes d4, we can still consider rook c7 or bishop a8. a8, another way of relieving the pin. Rook e1, knight rook f d8. And here we have a tense battle, because white eventually will have the hanging pawns on d4 and c4. It's a very complex position, a very complex structure, which offers chances for both sides, and it can turn very, very dynamic and very sharp. So it would be an interesting try for white, but of course here both sides would have chances. But in the game, c takes d5 was played, but this turns out to be harmless for black, because bishop takes, queen e2. But now, before white plays e4, we exchange in the center, c takes d4, knight takes. The attempt of seizing some space in the center with e4, bishop a8, e5 doesn't worries black, because after knight takes d5, there is also a nice square on c3, so bishop d4, bishop a3, and the black is at least fine here. And after knight takes d4, bishop takes, king takes. Ding played knight e5 here, but bishop takes d2, queen takes knight c5 would be even simpler, I guess. With your rook f d8, knight e4, maybe queen d7, queen b7 coming, so it's okay. Knight e5. And now maybe white could try knight knight 4 to f3 here to fight for an advantage, like bishop d2, rook c8, rook takes bishop e5. And an interesting line here is bishop b4, queen a6, queen d7, bishop f6, g takes f6, rook d1, forcing an unbalanced endgame, but I think black has enough resources. For example, queen c7, bishop c5, and if queen takes a7, bishop takes e3. So black should be fine here as well. And after e4, rook fd8, Ding eventually even got a pleasant position after exchanging rooks, f4, knight g6, knight c4, queen b7, a3, bishop c5. This is already easier for black. Ding got some pressure, and he even at some point had a very clear advantage close to winning. But he failed to exploit the chance, and the game eventually was drawn. But nothing too special here in this line. I believe maybe the a3 ideas for white can be exploited with in this position. Try to go deep in that analysis, or with knight e5 first in the a3. But the way as Radjabov played is very solid, very safe, but doesn't pose problems for black unless white is ready to play a3 and try to go for the position with the tension in the center, ready to play with the hanging pawns. And finally, let's see what I think it's the most interesting game of today from a theoretical point of view, which was Caruana against Rapport. I was expecting an interesting battle in this game because we have two quite different approaches over the board. Like Caruana is a super well prepared player and also a very concrete player, in my opinion. While Rapport is also a well prepared player, of course, but he has a different kind of preparation. He goes for different openings. He looks for fresh positions and unusual ideas that many of us would never consider, and that makes him a very special player, very unique player. So I was sure this would be an interesting game, and they didn't disappoint me and didn't disappoint us, I think, because it was e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes, knight c6. We have the Taimanov. Rapport has been playing the Taimanov recently. They had a previous encounter in Bucharest this year, the Super Bad Grand Chess Tour leg, I guess, in Romania. And that game went knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, and it was another fashionable line and the complicated line with knight takes c6, b takes e5. And that game eventually ended in a draw. But this time you have the Taimanov, knight c6, knight c3, and a6. And here Caruana played g4, which is an interesting idea and also less exploited, because after a6, that's not so common. There are only 16 games in the database with this move. Against queen c7, bishop a3, a6, in this position g4 has become very popular recently. We had, for example, the games Grandelius against Carlsen and the Esipenko Shankland in Tata Steel this year. And also in the last Norway chess last year, a game between Karyakin and Rapport. Rapport had already played this position before, but with queen c7. That game went b5, knight c6, queen c6. And they went for a very interesting but also strange position, I must admit, that I don't understand so well this line. Because here white plays queen d2, b4, knight e2, sacrificing the e4 pawn, then rook g1 threatening bishop g2, rook queen c4, knight f4, and queen c7 and castles. And white has a big lead in development for the pawn. There are some interesting ideas for white as well, but black is always solid setup. Black's setup is always very solid, and it's, well, We have a double-edged game, and that game ended in a draw, Kariak and Rapport last year, Norway chess. But against a6, g4 is rarer, is more rare, and there are only 16 games, so pretty new stuff, pretty fresh stuff. But Rapport played knight g7 after 2 minutes thinking, and this is the top choice by my engine after thinking for a few minutes. So this shows that Rapport was not exactly surprised by Caruana's move, and he knew what he was doing here. So that also shows about his own preparation. It shows a lot about his level of preparation. So the game continued with bishop e3 and b5. If black plays here something wrong on the move order, it's very easy to get a bad position, like knight takes d4, queen takes and b5, f4, bishop b7, castles, and the white has a much improved version of the game, as we will see. So it was b5, and here Caruana played a knight b3. He could have played this retreat before, but here I think it's the right moment, because black will continue playing like bishop b7, and I think he was maybe trying to anticipate this idea, because after bishop b7 black is already threatening b4, and there are some issues with the e4 pawn in many positions. And if he plays something like h4, bishop b7, bishop g2, for example, then after knight takes d4, queen takes knight c6, the queen retreats to d2, or either to d2 or d1, and the black plays knight e5. And in this position, black is already much better. There is no simple way to avoid knight c4 here, to face knight c4 in the next move for black. So he plays knight b3. Probably, I think bishop b7 would be met by knight c5. So that's why Rapport played knight a5 first. And here, surprisingly for me, because I consider this position very strange from a theoretical point of view, queen d2 was the first new move in the game. There was one game from like more than 20 years ago with g5. But after knight e to c6, bishop g2, knight c4, bishop c1, bishop e7, h4, bishop b7. I mean, looks like black has managed to get a very nice position, totally playable, and a very good position. So black is totally fine and eventually won the game. But Caruana played queen d2. And here, I don't know, because it was the first time that Rapport fought for a long time. He played knight takes b3, but this looks kind of a small imprecision, a small inaccuracy by black. It was better to start with bishop b7. But I think he was a bit worried about knight c5. He's still worried about knight c5. But the thing is that here black has the c6 square for the bishop. That makes some difference. On the other hand, if white plays f3, more solid, then bishop c6 again, queen f2, for example, threatening bishop b6, and knight takes, a takes b3. Here we have an improved version of the game, because after knight takes b3, a takes b3 is threatening knight takes b5, bishop b7, bishop g2. White is better organized in this position, but after bishop b7 first, it's not possible to play bishop g2 because of knight c4. So he should play knight c5, or bishop g2 is not possible, of course, or to play f3. But here it's a different story, because after bishop c6, if he plays queen f2, then knight b3, takes b3, there is no threat on b5, and the bishop is not on g2. So black has a nice idea here with h5 to look for counterplay, and after g5, knight g6, with similar ideas as in the game, and black has a nice position with bishop b4 coming. So after knight c5, bishop c6, An interesting line for white here is a4. Because long castles after knight g6, f4 and d6 looks like a very confused position. Very, very confused. Very difficult to evaluate also. So a4 makes sense, but then b4, knight a2, and a variation that I saw here was knight b7. Very interesting move. Knight takes a6, bishop takes e4, rook g1, and here black plays knight d5, sacrificing the pawn on b4 for a better development, an easier development like bishop e7. If queen d4, knight c5, and of course white can't take on g7, do it to bishop f6. But bishop d3, bishop takes, knight takes, castles, king f1, queen c7, and the position is still very strange. For example, bishop f4, bishop d6, takes. White has a pawn up, but white's not so well organized here, not well developed, and this king can always be a bit vulnerable, especially because f5 is coming in many positions. So black has some compensation. On the other hand, in the game went knight takes b3 directly, so a takes b3, and bishop b7, bishop g2 is a very logical move fighting against d5. Because in case of f3, then h5 is interesting, creating weaknesses on the king side, and if g takes h5, d5, breaking the sentry. Very, very nice way of activate black's position, of activating black's pieces. So makes sense to play bishop g2, trying to fight for the d5 square. Knight g6. And here Caruana made a very logical move to me, in my opinion, which is rook f1. Because he was certainly worried about knight h4 and the bishop when the bishop has no good squares. So knight h4 was kind of an annoying threat. The engine prefers long castles. And the position after knight h4, bishop g5. After bishop f1, b4, we have a disaster on e4, of course. But bishop g5, bishop e7, bishop h4, f4. I think black should have a playable position because of the bishop pair, and the engine confirms that evaluation, showing a nice idea here, which is castles directly. And in case of queen takes d7, queen b6, threatening to trap the queen, queen d4, bishop f2, queen takes b6, bishop takes b6. The bishops give a very nice compensation for white, actually, for black, actually. Because there are always ideas of attacking the pawns, like bishop e3, and also f5 is interesting to open more lines. And if white plays f5, then the dark squares are permanently exposed. So the pawn is not so important here, but the bishops are very good. And in case of king b1, for example, there is a very nice idea also with e5. Bishop c6 is bad to defend d7 because of e5 by white, then white gets some pressure. But after e5, to avoid this move, f takes e5, bishop c6, black has a nice position. This bishop is very strong now, and he can simply place a5 before a4 with at least promising counterplay on the queen side. So this makes the position dynamically balanced. So Caruana started with rook f1 before castling, vacating the h1 square for the bishop. Now Rapport played bishop c6, also a very useful move, preparing the counterplay on the queen side. It's very nice to see that he keeps the position flexible. He doesn't decide where the king goes, for example, but starts to prepare his own operations on the queen side with a5, a4, b4. And here is an important moment, because Caruana fought for 15 minutes and played g5. The engine says it's possible to play castles, but honestly I think this is too crazy with a5 coming. And f4, a4, but there are some beautiful variations showed by the computer the computer. For example, b takes a4 before knight d5 can be played. And in case of rook takes e4, b3, rook a1, king b2, rook d1, e takes d5, e takes bishop a8, d6. As strange as it may look, black is already worse, like queen f6, king b1, bishop takes, queen takes, bishop d6, queen d2, and white regains the piece with pressure, with a better position. And in case of e takes d5, e takes, bishop takes a4, rook d, e1, bishop e7, d6. Here looks like black is collapsing, that black should be lost, but there is rook c8. D takes d7, queen a5, and here queen d5 is the right move for white. Rook takes c2, king b1, queen a6, queen b7, forcing the exchange. And the position is always a mess, but it always ends with some machine line, some computer line ending in a draw. For example, rook c7, bishop e4, knight takes d7, bishop b6, rook c8, bishop a5 castles, bishop b4, rook f e8. So there are many interesting analysis to do in this game because the position is very complex. And e5 is a more solid alternative than queen c8. Looks complicated, complex for both sides. So the attack has already come on the queen side, and white still has more space in the center and the ideas like f5, but the position is double-edged. An interesting idea here for white was f4 directly. I think Caruana first wanted to play this move, intended to play like this, but maybe he was a bit worried about queen h4, and that's why he played g5 first. But the point is that here after rook f2, queen takes g4, there is knight e2. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he hasn't considered this move, but knight e2 is very nice because he avoids problems with the pin on b4 and prepares to castle to the queen side. So after bishop e7, castles rook g1, the queen might be in danger on the king side, and now we have the g file open and f5 is coming, so looks like white has a promising initiative here. Perhaps with correct play, the position should be dynamically balanced, but I think the pawn is at least nicely compensated here. Nice compensation for the pawn, at least. But surprisingly, after g5, a5, in this position, black is already fine. Black is already playing for an advantage, as surprising as it may look. f4, a4, and for example, after f5, knight e5, bishop f4, queen b8, the position is already pleasant for black. Black's threatening to finish the development with bishop d6. And white has to play very, very well here to avoid being in trouble. First rook d1, and now a takes b3 is an idea, is an option. Bishop c5 is also okay. It's also nice. Just continuing the development. But a takes b3, c takes b4, knight a4, rook a5. A nice maneuver, activating the rook by the 4th rank. Queen d4, intending to play knight b6, but now rook b5. And here, there are some curious positions, like, for example, bishop g3, bishop e7, and if white plays f6, g takes, bishop d8, and black is already clearly better according to the engine, and but after being shocked for a few moments, it's possible to realize that black will play bishop c7, rook g8, and it has beautiful coordination, very nice coordination. On the other hand, the knight on a4 looks out of play, and the position of the black king is very solid, so there are no problems for black, and the black is already getting some pressure in the center also, with rook g4, for example, later, and queen b7, ideas like this. So another possibility is rook f2, maybe preparing bishop f1, or maybe preparing to bring the king to g1 to a safe place. And then castles f6. Now it's easier to play this move, but bishop d8, f takes g7, rook e8, and this is fine. Again, knight c5, bishop b6, bishop e5, bishop c5 is a balanced endgame here, and an equal endgame. But okay, Caruana didn't play f5 because I think after queen b8 it's easier to find the black's moves, especially because of rook d1, bishop c5 is easy and good as well. So he played the rook d1, and the bishop b4 came. Here queen d4, attacking b4 and g7. Something like f5 could be risk for white, because after knight h4, bishop h1, castles. This looks fine for, at least fine for black. Or he could play also e takes f5. E takes f5, queen f2, a takes b3. This is a very also another nice position. E takes f5, queen f2. The knight, if the knight goes back to g6, it takes f5. But a takes b3, queen h4, rook a2. C takes b3, rook b2, bishop d4, castles, and the position is a mess because black is taking the b3 pawn. The rook's coming to e8. e4 is also hanging, so too many points under attack, and too much activity for black. So it's very difficult to evaluate this position. It's simply a mess. But Caruana played the queen d4, and here it was Rapport's turn to choose between us some options, but he could have played very ambitious here with bishop takes c3. This was the most ambitious option for black. Instead, he played the queen a5. But the bishop takes c3 offered very nice chances for black. For example, if b takes c3, castles, and let's imagine white can try something like king f2 to evacuate, to get a safe position for the king on g1. There is a very strong idea here, e5. This break frog is very, very good for black. F takes e5, rook e8. King g1, rook takes e5, and black is strategically winning already. Queen e7, for example, and the e4 pawn will be lost soon, very soon. And after queen takes c3, castles, black is at least fine, but black's position looks even more promising. I think the reason to not go for this is because visually it's not easy to give this bishop the dark squared bishop, because looks at first sight looks like black is going to have serious problems on the dark squares, but a more detailed analysis shows that there are no problems for black, and black's play is even easier in this position. For instance, if white starts with bishop c5, rook e8 and b4, now e5 is very strong again. f5, knight f4, then g5 is hanging, the bishop is also hanging, so white has to play queen g3, and now comes another strong idea, a3. b takes a3, rook takes a3, queen takes, knight takes g2, king f2, bishop takes e4, and the queen is coming to g5 again. If f6, d5, black has excellent compensation by the material. Queen c8 is coming next, and the queen will invade on the queen side, the king side. And black eventually has a very strong attack. The knight can go back to f4, so it's very easy to coordinate black's pieces. So the best move here is b4, but after rook e8, the position looks very, very rich in ideas for black. Also, f5 is possible, as after g takes f6, queen takes, rook takes. This position should be at least equal. There are no problems for black. There's always this a3 idea to activate the rook, so we have enough counterplay if necessary. And in case of rook e8, black is always threatening this e5 to weak, make the dark squares on the king side weak. So, for example, if you rook f2, there is no time to to go to g1, e5 directly. f5, knight f4, bishop takes e takes, and white's already losing material. King f2, the same. e5, f5, knight f4, and black's better. So rook d3 is the recommendation by the engine. It's already a very subtle move. I think the idea is to play in a prophylactical way against the a3 idea, like queen d2, for example, and later try to organize white's position. But now there are some interesting ideas like rook a6 and king d2, e5, f5, knight h4, bishop h1, the queen a8, pressing the e4 pawn and also keeping the ideas of a3. So white would have to find many difficult moves here to keep the balance, like a rook d6, and when a3 b3, the line goes on. It's very long, but I think it's enough to say that not easy to play for white, and black has very interesting ideas here. But I agree that it's not an easy decision to give this bishop, strategically speaking. It only works because black has a lot of concrete ideas that come just in time, but otherwise black would be even with problems on the dark squares. So Rapport made a much more human move, which is queen a5, much more natural than queen takes g7. And now, if he wanted more emotions, he could have played the long castles, and it's again very difficult to evaluate this position. Like just gives up the g7 pawn, finishes the development, and try to play actively. Everything could go on from here. Like king f2 is possible, but the position will be always complicated. Instead, he played a3, and trying to, of course, to take the to make this knight weak on c3. King f2, finally the king goes to some square, and now castles was still possible, but a takes b2 was played, knight e2, and here the game looks very complicated, very, very complex, I know, but it will end in a draw after e5. Because if he plays bishop f8 directly, then queen takes b2 is already winning for white, is winning a free pawn up. But after e5, he sets up a nice repetition after f5, bishop f8, queen f6, bishop e7, queen g7, and the game ended in a draw. So yeah, it was I was expecting a longer battle because of the opening, and the position was very rich. But also, as we have seen in the analysis, the positions were very complex to evaluate, so not easy even for two super grandmasters, very strong players like Caruana and Rapport. But it was a very rich game in the opening phase, and if this line becomes popular, there will be many interesting games in the future in this position, because there are too many ideas to discover for both sides. So I hope you have enjoyed this theoretical coverage of round 6, and yeah, let's see what happens in the next two games. But as we have seen all the days, these guys are showing interesting ideas and trying to make something different in the opening. So I hope you have enjoyed.